Is everyone okay with that? Well, Doug, welcome. We are so glad you're here with us. We are gathering after a meal together, so we are excited and refreshed and ready to hear from you. So, for those of you who don't know Doug, he is Dr. Foster to me. He is someone that actually Riley and I know from church, but he's a well-known figure in the Churches of Christ. He's done a lot of work in academia. He focused a lot on the history of the Church of Christ movement and its function in the wider church. He's focused on racism as well. And so he has kind of a broad field of expertise. He also has a million different degrees. You'll have to ask him sometime. His CV is like 9 pages long. And he is married to Linda with son Mark, who is currently a missionary in China, previously in Thailand. And his daughter lives in San Antonio. I did not write down her name. What's her name, Doug?
Oh, Mary Elizabeth. We just call her Mary now, though.
There we go. Sorry, I didn't write that down. So what we've been doing this summer, as you know, is inviting different guests into the space, into our conversations surrounding our new mission statement. So we have this broader category, right, of embracing all God's people. And I'm really excited to hear from Doug tonight because he obviously brings a different perspective, brings a different nuance into this conversation. So, Doug, will you go ahead and tell us just about your life and career? What do we need to know about you?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks so much for letting me be with you. I've actually never attended Coal Mill Road, but I know so many people who have been part of that congregation, and and have a very deep respect for what you are doing and who you are. And so, thanks for letting me be part of this program tonight. So, I was born in Northwest Alabama in a small town called Tuscumbia, and grew up there. Fifth generation member of Stone Campbell Churches of Christ. I went to actually a school from first grade through 12th grade that was run by Churches of Christ, Morris Hill Bible School, begun in the 1940s there in Florence, Alabama. I took Spanish when I was there. I was fascinated by different cultures, different understandings of the world, different ways of constructing reality, I guess you'd say. So I spent a summer in Torreon, Mexico, between my junior and senior year in high school studying. And then when I went to Lipscomb, I began to um, also, that was my undergraduate major was foreign languages, modern foreign languages. And I spent a number of years, not the entire year every year because I was in school at Lipscomb University, but in Spain, in northwest Spain, a city called La Coruña, and planted a church there. Also became involved in a Project Italy group, which was a mission group of mostly college students at the time that went every summer for 2.5 months or so to Italy and did work with churches and so forth in that context. So I finished Lipscomb, did a PhD at Vanderbilt in church history, and then taught at Lipscomb for a short period of time, about 7 years, came to ACU in 1991 and was teaching restoration history, as it was called, um, church history, general church history, as well as eventually at the Graduate School of Theology, where I did most of my teaching, developing a course called Issues in Global Christianity, because as I was teaching the Reformation and the church history course that goes from the Reformation up to the present, it became clear to me that even my PhD education had not really prepared me for the kind of realities that were happening in the 20th century and especially now the 21st about the configuration of Christianity around the world. So that's in a nutshell some of the things that I would say.
Thank you for that. And speaking of that and kind of touching on that more, what can you tell us about the landscape of Christianity, both locally and globally today?
Well, okay. I guess you could say in a lot of ways, well, let me just show a graphic. I'm going to share my screen and show a graphic that, let's see, the distribution of Christians. Can everyone see that?
Yes, that looks great. Thanks.
So this is a graphic. It's from 2020. I mean, it's just come out in the World Christian Encyclopedia, third edition, which just came out. And so just take a look at this. The green circles. I'm sorry, I'm doing the wrong one. Let me give you the one that I meant to give. This is the one I meant to give. Yeah, so these are the distributions of the people who are professed Christians around the world. So just take a look at that. In 1900, the distribution between what they're calling the Northern Hemisphere, which would basically be North America and Western Europe. 82% of all Christians, professed Christians, lived in that area. 18% were elsewhere. But now, in 2020, only 33% of the world's Christians live there. 67 are elsewhere. And just take a look. I'll just give you a moment to look. Where are, numerically at least, the most Christians, professed Christians? Well, it's Africa. And the second is Latin America. So what you begin to see is, and then a massive increase in Christians, that is professed Christians in Asia. We don't even know for sure. My son, Chelsea mentioned, is a missionary or has been working in China for the last 8 years. And it's pretty clear, even from a lot of the literature about Christianity in China, we don't have any idea how many are there. It's pretty clear that they're probably, well, it's pretty clear that it's certain that there are more Christians in China than any other country. Of course, somebody might say, well, there's more everything in China than any other country. But the fact of the matter is, we don't even know how many are there. So the configuration of Christianity globally has changed. Now, I'll hold off in saying much about that, the first part of what you just said, Chelsea, because I think the implications of what you see happening there are going to have, that's the implications for the local churches in America, in North America. And I have some things that we'll talk about in a few more minutes about that. But I think just sort of seeing that whole shift of Christian distribution is something that is massively important that has happened in the last century.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that's something that I didn't know until recently. And, we have such this culture of mission trips and short-term missions because we've got to kind of go to those heathens and make sure that they become Christians. But in reality, that scale is kind of tipping. So can you tell us more about what factors kind of contributed to this new trend?
Well, I think there are a couple of things that are at the top of the list. One, probably everybody could immediately say, it was the sending of missionaries, truly beginning as early with Catholic missionaries, at least from Europe, as the 1400s, 1500s, as they began to go into different parts of the world. But the Protestant missionaries that went from North America and from Western Europe were, especially in the 1700s and following, were massive. This was a huge, huge worldwide effort. And so you began to see people being touched by the message of Christianity. And again, we can make all sorts of critiques about some of the connections between the missionaries and colonialism and so forth and so on. That's a mixed story, I suppose. But the fact of the matter is, the missionaries began to take the gospel to places where it had not been prevalent at all before. The second thing, and again, maybe this is also kind of intuitive, maybe people would say that makes sense, or I kind of already knew that, but I'm not sure we realize the profundity, if that's a good word, of the second piece. And that is the missionaries and agencies connected to the missionaries translated the Bible into the languages of the people. In other words, they weren't just dependent anymore on, and I'll say it, the white Western missionaries to explain to them what the Bible said. They increasingly had it and have it. There's huge effort even going on today in their own languages. And so they don't need that, they don't have that kind of dependence anymore on on listening to those missionaries. They can read the Bible for themselves and they can understand it for themselves. And frankly, they don't understand it the way white Westerners do. We'll talk more about some of the implications of that later on, but it's profound. And the whole idea that they have the Bible access and they have access to the Bible in their own language is a massive, massive piece of why this is happening, why things are happening the way they are, I should say.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that's, I think in some ways we can say, wow, what a victory, missions have worked in some ways. But I think too, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's also the tipping balance in the other direction of in the global South, Christianity is on the rise, and then in North America and in Western cultures, it's kind of on the decline. So what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's been pretty much a standard interpretation of what's going on for quite some time, actually. Even the statistics in North America and the United States, specifically about the number of people who now say they are members of any church at all, those things are really turning around. And it's happened that in Western Europe a long time ago, as far as the numbers of Christians, the numbers of professed Christians, people who go to church. And I think I've heard a lot of people talk about that in various kinds of ways. Some of them are lamenting the fact that now we, that as Christians, are being marginalized and we've got to retake influence and that kind of thing. Others are saying, no, true Christians have always lived on the margins. They've always been the people who were not the ones who held power, governmental power, economic power, and that those things actually have corrupted Christianity. But however you see it, the description of the decline of Christianity is a very myopic Western viewpoint, because when you look at the full picture of Christianity, it is not declining; it is growing. And maybe this would be the time to show that other graphic that I put up first. And this is one that I'll let you take a look at. Well, I keep clicking on the wrong one every time. This is the missionaries. Well, it's telling me I'm giving the missionary slide, but it's not getting the missionary slide. Let me try it one more time. Wonderful technology. I'll just try the other.
It's the false teachers working against us.
It must be. It must be a demon. Well, I'll just have to. I've got a copy of it here. I'll just hold it up. And if you begin looking at this, of course, the red dots, the red circles are the countries that are receiving the most missionaries. The green circles are the ones that are sending the most missionaries. And if you look at this, I can send, if anyone is interested in having copies of these charts and so forth, I'll be glad to send those to you. The United States is still the nation that sends the most because it has the most money. But if you also notice, uh, so 135,000 missionaries sent in 2020 from the United States. But the United States received 38,000 missionaries from other countries.
Wow.
The second largest missionary sending country is Brazil. The third is South Korea. These missionaries are being sent all around. Even Nigeria is the fourth largest sending country. And and so what you see here, and again, when we talk about the implications of the way that the non-white Western missionaries construct Christianity, understand the world to operate, that has implications for the churches in America. I remember 2 or 3 years ago, I met a man at the Pepperdine Lectures, I think it was. Yes, that's where it was. And he was from Ghana, and I had taught in Ghana at the school in Accra. And so I was asking, he had lived in the United States for some time. He was a minister of a church that started out years ago as primarily a church ministering to Ghanaians in Baltimore, Maryland, who were immigrants to the United States. But they were such a growing and dynamic church, they began to reach out to their neighborhood, and they began to convert people from the neighborhood in which that church existed, people of all different races. And now that church has made a great inroads into the community where they live and doing apparently great good. But they don't do it. They don't do church like Cole Mill Road or Mentor Lane where I am. And they don't see a lot of the same things that we do as far as the way we understand church to be done, the way we understand authority, structure, governance, etc. And so those kinds of things are happening in increasing measure.
That's such an interesting perspective, and one, again, I think a lot of us don't have, is that, we're in the minority, but Christianity, you're right, is still on the rise. And I think it's important for us to just know this as the reality. And that's one of the reasons that we need to, continue to be learning and growing in what we know about global faith. But beyond that, why is it important that we shift our mindsets, or how should we shift our mindsets to kind of reflect this new reality in faith?
Well, I think let me just go ahead and talk for a moment about the implications that some of the implications, at least, that I see for global Christianity or world Christianity because of the shifts that we just briefly touched on. I think that it's safe to say that what you see in global Christianity that's now very much present in the United States in the sense that we were just talking about is that the Christians are much more conservative. Now let me explain what I mean by that. They read the Bible and they take it for what it says. Okay? Now, they have a biblical or maybe a supernatural worldview. They do not have the worldview that we have. In fact, in the class that I was teaching at ACU, we were reading a number of different books, but there was a story. I'll just read a couple of short paragraphs. Southern Christians, that is Southern Hemisphere Christians, are reading the New Testament and taking it very seriously. In it, they see the power of Jesus fundamentally expressed through his confrontation with demonic powers, especially those causing sickness and insanity. And so in a history of Christianity in Africa is one of the textbooks we were using. A man is quoted, an African man was quoted. He grew up in Christianity in Africa, but he left. He said, when we were in those European churches, we used to read about the works of Jesus Christ. Cripples were made to walk, and the dead were brought to life, evil spirits driven out. That was what was being done. We Africans, however, who were being instructed by white people, never did anything like that. We were taught to read the Bible, but we ourselves never did what the people of the Bible did. And so this supernatural worldview and the expectation, I guess, of, why wouldn't you? Like they're thinking, this is what it talks about. This is what Jesus is doing. This is what he came. And the white missionaries, of course, were doing what, I'm not sure the best terminology, sophisticated white Westerners would say, oh, that's superstitious. That's not to be taken literally. That's not, we understand that differently now because we know better. And these people are saying, what? And I think that's one of the most important implications of what has happened in the shift that's taking place. And it makes a lot of North American Christians uncomfortable. There are other things, but go ahead, Chelsea.
Oh, no, please go on.
Well, this was a semester-long course that I taught, so there were lots and lots of things that could be said, but I think that the change, well, I'm not sure how best to say it, but here, let me just say it one way at least. The people of the Southern Hemisphere, most of those people in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa, have come to the conclusion, many, that what they were taught by the white missionaries, and many of the missionaries are no longer in those places as such, they're working in other places, but was not what they needed to have, and they're not really quite sure that we are really Christians because we don't believe the Bible. That's the kind of terminology sometimes you might hear. Don't misunderstand me. There are many churches that are heavily influenced still by the white churches, the Western churches that support them. But there has been a turn that I can see. I've spent a lot of time in teaching classes in the South Pacific region at South Pacific Bible College that has students from all over the Pacific Rim, in Asia, Thailand, and so forth. And also at African Christian College in what used to be Swaziland, now Eswatini, that had African students from all over English-speaking Africa. And they're definitely, they don't see any need to be instructed anymore, many of them, by the white Westerners. Now, it's not that they're ungrateful. In fact, the culture in most of these places is very much to revere the people who taught them. But I've been to place after place after place where I've been told by people that I was close to, when we are here by ourselves, we do it this way. If one of our missionary teachers comes to visit, who we love and who we revere and who we would never do anything to disrespect, we do it the way he taught us to do it. And again, they don't see this as any kind of duplicity or trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. What they see is it's time for us. And the trappings that we receive the gospel in, and even some of the things that we were kind of taught had to be done this way, we don't see it that way. We don't see that we have to do it in those ways. An African church should look like an African church, not a Tennessee church.
That almost sounds like, to me at least, like how when I was younger, if my grandparents were in town, we would go to the a cappella service instead of the instrumental service. So yeah, this is an interesting kind of way that we're headed, where we're learning, how do we connect with these other churches. And one of the things that came up in our conversation the other day was about our, again, mission statement, how we formed it, and kind of the processes that we went through. And one of the things that came up is one of our touch points is joining, I think I should know this, joining God's global church in the ministry of reconciliation. And this was kind of one of those things that we had to go back and forth on, because some people were hearing, we're joining God's global church. Well, does this mean we're a missional church? Like, it's okay if we are, but is that like kind of one of our key tenets? And we kind of had to work through, well, what does it mean to be joining God's global church? Like, does that mean that we need to be sending more missionaries, or does that mean something different? Like, how do we see ourselves in the perspective of this wider context? How do we see ourselves as just one of the churches among many brothers and sisters? So how would you say this, again, this new reality that you're talking about would connect with our lived experience here?
Well, again, this is a matter of discernment, but I could make a couple of general suggestions, I think. Number one, we've got to really join God's mission in his global church. I think that's the terminology that's in your mission statement. I think that we're going to have to give up control. I mean, to start off with, the United States still has more financial resources than practically any of the other places that we're talking about. The churches in America, even though they're on the decline, as far as just sheer dollars, we've got the resources. We have more than anybody else. And so we cannot just simply say, we're just going to pull back and let things go on their own. I mean, I don't think we should. Although I remember when I was in Ghana being told that when they had their, at the end of colonialism, and basically the Ghanaian government was formed by Ghanaians, and they basically kicked out all white missionaries for a number of years. And a lot of the people told me, the Nsawam Road Church in Accra, over 2,000 members, they said, we grew more when the missionaries were gone than we did when they were here. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we should just let things alone. But on the other hand, we do have the resources. And I think that what we should do is to trust the people there and not have strings attached that we demand certain things be done and said. Again, it's not like you're being irresponsible. I'm not saying to be irresponsible with the resources, but what I'm saying is that this at best is a partnership. And it's not like you're just throwing money away and we don't want to hear anything more from you. No, that's not what we're talking about at all. This is a mutual thing where we trust each other and we love each other. But we've got to stop putting all the requirements, the strings that they're attached to our resources, that I think has been much the case in the past. One of the ministers in Ghana told me a story of the Nsawam Road Church, which is that 2,000 member church in Accra, Church of Christ, totally African led. And there was a missionary, white missionary, who had been responsible for some of the support, at least, of one of the leaders, the preacher. And he disapproved of something. And so he wanted to meet with the elders. And so they said, sure, and we'll meet with you. And so he came in, and they shut the door and locked it and turned a camera on. And they said, okay, tell us what you're thinking. And he began to blast them for something. I don't know the specifics of what they were doing that he thought was not right, should not be done that way. And they listened to him. And then they basically said, what you are saying is that you do not trust us as leaders. And these were seasoned men, leaders of the church out there. You do not trust us to be able to understand scripture and to carry out God's mandate for us in our context, in the culture in which we live. And they basically turned it back on him and said, "You're the one who's out of line." And he just got all huffy and then left. But that was the end of it, because they basically did not need the support at that point anyway. I think we've got to just cut loose of those strings. And I think that another piece that might have implications for local churches, congregations, we've got to join others in our places who are different from us. I think that we generally have the notion that, and it's true at some level, and I understand this, we're this, and we're happy to have people come and join us and be like us. But I think, and this is hard to do, and the logistics of it get kind of messy, I'm sure, a lot of times, the few times I've seen it. We've got to join others in our communities that are very different from us in every way that we possibly can. I think this might be, I don't know, some people might call it an ecumenical move, that is to try to reflect the unity of Christ's church in a larger way. I'm not talking about old time ecumenical movement, modern thinking of some kind of organizational stuff where, you have mergers or things like that, although sometimes those are fine. I'm talking about actually doing things with other folks who are very different from you, and trusting each other and loving each other, and reaching out to the world, to the marginalized, in concert with one another. That's the way the global church, I think, in many places is operating. And I think that that's the way we reflect being part of what God is doing in his global church or in the world church.
Wow. Yes, definitely. Thank you for all of that. And thank you again for all of this wisdom. I think now we actually are going to transition over to opening it up for questions. So I think, if we have people on Zoom, they can just speak right up. And if you're in the room, will you say your name before you talk into the microphone?
So I'm proxy for Dr. Beyer, who has this question for Doug. Said, would you comment on the observation that in the US, the decreased reverence for science in the past several years does not seem to be associated with increased religiousness, though there does appear to be an increase in dogmatism?
Interesting question. It becomes very it becomes a very complex thing to try to deal with. Again, when I was talking about a few minutes ago, the supernatural worldview that many in the global South, many Christians in the global South have. There's another story about John Mbiti, who was an African theologian, tells about a young man from a village that he knew who'd come to the West, and he'd gotten a PhD in theology, spent 9 years, and came back home, and the people were having a feast for him. And this woman suddenly shrieks and falls to the ground, and it was his own sister, and he rushes over to her and says, "Somebody call the doctor, get her to the hospital." And they all just kind of look at him and they say, you've got a PhD in theology. Do something for your sister. Cast out the demon. She's being harassed by the spirit of her dead aunt. And he says, "There's no such thing." And they say, "Well, the closest hospital is 50 miles away. There's no doctor anywhere near. Do something for your sister." So, we who are so used to having access to these kinds of things, I think what maybe the question is reflecting is the current political atmosphere, where the depreciation of scientific studies, for example, with the vaccine for COVID, and certain kinds of dogmatism that is shot through with all sorts of pieces, including white supremacy, including ultra-right nationalism, white nationalism in America. And so, yeah, if you're talking about religiosity as being reflective of true Christianity, I would say definitely the drop in respect for and belief in, I guess you'd say, the scientific discoveries that we have become so used to. When you start looking at global Christianity, however, you've got a drop. I mean, there's not been a rise in some cases for the respect for and the access to scientific understanding or scientific medical treatments, the kinds of things that we take for granted. And so um, I'm not sure how to answer that. Again, I think we're thinking primarily about political situation in the United States is what I'm picking up on. But when you start putting it into the larger context of world Christianity, it's a really mixed thing.
I think we actually have another question from Zoom. It says, from Carrie, I so appreciate your example in teaching at the RULS that I had the opportunity to go to in Dallas. How do you make a practice in your life/congregation in going into other different circles or churches, like you were just saying, and joining God's work with them? Wondering if you have examples of what that has looked like for you.
Um, well, I can give a couple of sort of examples. For me, in the local community, it has been uh, on issues of race and the school system, working with a variety of Christian groups and individuals who have come together to try to go and provide support for a healthier set of policies in the school system that mm, would not disproportionately punish students of color. When you've got I mean, the statistics are so clear that students of color are punished more for the same kinds of infractions and put into detention and receiving all sorts of punishments that others would not have necessarily and have not, even for the same kinds of things, received. And so I'm talking about holistic understandings. But also on another example, I mean, there are 1,000 ways of doing it, I suppose. We've worked closely with a couple of Catholic churches in Abilene um, to try to understand how we can work together for strengthening the Christian community and the community as a whole, and bringing people together, and especially in the midst of some of the really heart-wrenching division that has taken place in the country in the last number of years, motivated at some level, at least by political issues. And so, again, that's a matter of discernment, it seems to me, and it could happen in 1,000 different kinds of ways, and it doesn't have to be a big production. I think a lot of times we get the idea that we've got to sit down and have this, we're going to get a big committee together and we've got to come up with a plan and we've got to have um, some sort of an organization and we've got to do something that's big and splashy and will make the newspaper. Well, I understand the need for thinking things through, and I understand the need for planning. I'm a hyper planner. I maybe obsessive compulsive planner. And so it's been hard for me sometimes just to say, okay, let's just, I'll just get with a couple of folks and let's do something or talk about some things, and that other people get interested and involved and see some of the positive things that begin to happen. I think there's a book that I'm reading right now with a small group that is just really, really good. And you may think this is strange to be bringing up in a context of a discussion of world Christianity or global Christianity, but it's by Jemar Tisby. And the title of the book is How to Fight Racism. Now, there are lots of things out there on anti-racism, and they're all really, really good materials. Jemar Tisby is coming at it overtly as a Christian. Many of the materials out there, as good as they are not. I think Christians can definitely, I mean, whenever I read those things, I see them in Christian terms and see the principles being used by Christians. But he's very much overtly coming at it as a Christian. And so he talks about knowledge, three components: knowledge, relationships, and commitment to action. Those are the three pieces. And so you're doing a little bit maybe tonight of the knowledge piece. You know, and again, if you want more information, I can send you lots of links. I see Emily. Hi, Emily. She was in my class many years ago, and she knows, you know, we have lots of stuff out there to read if you'd like to see more stuff. In fact, this is probably one that you would be very interested in. So it's World Christianity and Mission 2020. And it has quite a number of pieces of information, including a couple of those maps that I showed you, talking about some of these kinds of shifts. But you've got to have some knowledge, and you've got to know what's going on in your community. Are there, I suspect there are, non-US white Western churches? I mean, some of those missionaries probably showed up in Durham. Some of those missionaries from other countries to the United States. Check it out. Find out what's going on. Relationships. And again, you don't have to make a big production. Just call somebody at that place. I mean, again, I'm brainstorming. Call somebody at that church and just say, I'd love to sit down with you and have coffee or lunch. Let's just talk. You know, we're Christians over here and you're Christians there. Let's talk about what we can do together. And then as you begin to build the relationships and the knowledge, you come to a commitment to action. And there's where the discernment has to come for you as the Cole Mill Church of Christ in Durham, North Carolina. And it might be different from the Minter Lane Church of Christ in Abilene, Texas, or any other church, but you have to discern that. But I think that those three pieces are really important in knowing how to, or what kinds of things could happen. And again, you don't have to put on a big production.
Hi, my name is Landon Klingeman. I've got a question. So you were talking about how a lot of people in other countries are more superstitious or more conservative in their views of like, okay, the Bible talks about spirits and all of these things. Where is the line between that and like syncretism? Like with Santeria, or I'm familiar with South America. So like in Peru, there are all kinds of different holidays celebrating our Lord of whatever, and that's just like a Quechua god or Quechua saint type person. So where do we draw the line of like, okay, this is Christianity and this is something that is not quite anymore?
Yeah, great question. I don't know. But I will say this, that when you start studying the history of Christianity, every culture into which Christianity went appropriated the cultures of those countries, of those nations, of those cultures, appropriated those things to Christianity. Now, again, the label of syncretism, which means that it's not really Christianity, is an easy thing to be really nervous about, and it should be, if in fact that's what's happening. But quite frankly, I think that like Paul says, I take all things captive for Christ. And if a person is in a culture, here's the problem. I think a lot of times, and I'm still in that mindset, and I have to catch myself, I think sometimes, we assume that somehow culture is opposite or is as opposed to Christianity. And that's not true. I mean, there are parts of every culture, every human culture, that are opposed to Christianity. American materialism and ultra capitalism, you know, making money is the main thing in life, getting more stuff and having nicer cars and houses, etc. And then that is a deeply embedded part of our culture. I mean, you even judge churches by that, right? I mean, they have a nice building, they have a nice parking lot, they have lots of folks who are doctors and lawyers and nice cars in the parking lot on Sunday morning. You know, that's the measure of success, and that's not true. It's not true at all. If that's the case, that's fine, but that's not the measure of whether or not they're truly Christian. And so, if you can discern what part of a culture is contrary to the gospel, then yes, you must reject that. But you know, and sometimes it gets a little hard. I had an African student, an African missionary, actually on a Zoom online class. We didn't do Zoom in those days. Everybody does it now. But he was very he was conflicted because they were using drums in the Christian worship service, but there were some people who saw in that particular tribal area who saw the drums as calling up the spirits of dead people to do things and misunderstood what was going on. And so he was conflicted, you know. I don't want to tell him they're just using a cultural musical piece here in their worship, and they don't mean it that way at all. But there were some people misunderstanding it. Should I tell them let's not do that, or what? So I don't know, but I think a lot of times we will too quickly jump to the accusation of syncretism when what is happening is that, as Paul said, people are trying to take everything captive for Christ. And so a lot of the things that we even do today, it's cultural. The American way of doing things and in Christianity, they're discerning those things. Doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean it's evil or wicked. It means that we must understand that those things are not of the essence of the gospel.
Thank you, Doug. And thank you so much again for taking the time to be with us tonight. If people want to contact you or learn more from you, maybe you could drop information in the chat or tell them how to reach out to you, or we can get the information out to whoever wants it later.
Sure. I'll give you my email address. It's pretty easy. FosterD, FOSTERD, @acu.edu.
That works. Everyone got it? All right. Well, are there any parting words that you want to leave us with, or anything that we can be chewing on in the next several days?
Well, you know, there's so much to chew on. I just really am grateful that you're thinking about this, and so encouraged that you are thinking in these ways and making a commitment to act. And so, again, using Tisby's 3 pieces, the knowledge, the relationships, and the commitment to act, I'm just really encouraged by what you guys are doing.
Well, thank you. And thanks again for being with us. We will see you later.
All right. See ya. Bye-bye.